A friend of mine and a fellow YouTuber, Matti Sulanto, or Matti Sulanto as we pronounce his name here in Finland, made a video about photo gear or camera that he had been using in his very long photographic career. And in this video, or in his video, he asked his viewers what cameras have they used. And I thought it would be nice to answer to him in a form of a video. Cameras that I have used coming up. Hi there. I'm Peter Forsgaard, an Olympus visionary and a professional photographer from Helsinki, Finland. And let's get right into the business. I have a bunch of cameras here behind me. Not all the cameras that I've used, and there are some vintage cameras. But let's start with the first camera that I had. I got it for a birthday present. Let's say I was 8 or 9 years old. I don't really remember exactly, but 7 or 8, 9, something like that. And it was Agfamatic 100 sensor. And it used 122 film. It was kind of like a film box that you put into the camera, and then you sell the whole box to the developer, and then you get, after a week or two, you get the pictures. And I don't have the camera anymore. I have no idea where it is, but I do have some photographs that I took. I found them in an old album that I have. And there's this picture is something that I actually remember taking this, and I thought it was a magnificent view. And actually this image is not that bad. It's been, you know, destroyed, or the colors have gone yellow like all the film, what do you call the film, the prints went when in the 70s. They just don't last. My first SLR and my second camera was a Cosina CS-1. And I remember getting that after I got paid for my first job that I did. It was a summer job for a month, and I used the money to buy the camera. And I also got a 50mm, I believe it was f2 lens. I don't have the lens anymore. I don't know where it is. I might have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it. And the reason that I got the Cosina CS-1 was that I could not afford Pentax cameras. At the time, in the 70s, Pentax made the best lenses for cameras, and the Cosina had the same mount than the Pentax cameras, and that's why I got it, because I was gonna get some good lenses. And that's something that I'm really proud of myself still, because I wanted to spend the money on the lenses and not on the body. Of course, at the beginning I didn't have, or actually had only one lens. Later I remember getting a 135mm f2.8 Tamron lens, and then I had a wide-angle zoom for it. I believe it was something like a 20 to 35 or something like that. It wasn't very good quality, and I remember there was some issues with the focusing with that lens, which of course with the wide-angle lens it wasn't that big of a deal, but I remember sending it for repair because there was something wrong with the focusing. And I used that camera for quite many years because photography was my hobby. But then I think it was somewhere around 1985, 1986, I bought 2 Pentax Super A cameras. And those are the cameras that I started my professional career with. And that was a very good camera. I could not find those 2 cameras. Somewhere I have a box of cameras where there are other cameras that I've used, but I cannot find it right now, which is a pity. But as you see, we have plenty of cameras to look at later. And Pentax was a really good, and as I said, they made really good lenses. And then Pentax came up with autofocus camera. Actually, the second camera was SFX, but that camera was horrible. The AF didn't work, and the lenses, there was a problem that they didn't have proper focusing rings, so it was almost impossible to use, which was a pity because I really liked Pentax cameras. And that's why I then eventually, a few years later, or actually I think of 5 years later, I got my first autofocus camera, which was the EOS10, Canon EOS10. And that camera is also in the box that I don't know where it is. But the EOS10 had one very funny feature. It came with the barcode reader, and then there was this little booklet that had different photographic scenarios and different situations. There was like a backlit, a sunrise, sunset, and portrait and stuff. And you read with the pen, you read the barcode, and then you transferred it into the camera, and then the camera settings were made so that the image will be, you know, the best settings for that particular scenario. And I think I found that very funny. I never used it. Of course, I tried it, but I think it was a piece of crap. But the good thing about that it was one of the first approaches to computational imaging. So in that sense, it was an interesting thing. But I think that's the only camera that they ever had it. But as I said, it was a piece of crap, that part. Of course, otherwise the camera was really good, and I used it for many, many years. And in the beginning of the 90s, I was working for another company which was specialized photographing school students. We do group photos and portrait photos. And then what we had as a camera was a Nikon F3, a huge body with the motor drive. And what was really special about it, it also had a 250 roll film back. So it was a huge camera. And so that we could shoot for 250 kids almost, because, you know, it was one shot a kid. So it was very efficient to do that with that camera. We didn't want to, or did not need to change the film that often. But it was huge, and holding one of those all day was something, was really something. And then for the group shots, we used Zenza Bronica 645 camera. So the size of the negative was 6x4.5, and it wasn't that big. It was actually smaller than the Nikon combo with all that big gear around it. And 1994, I started my freelance career, and then I bought Mamiya RB67, which is also in the box that I cannot find. This is a bit embarrassing, but as I promised, I'll show you some cameras later. That was really a beast, and why I really liked about it is that it had a kind of revolving film back, so that you could do portrait and the horizontal, or the portrait and landscape mode or format, with just twisting the back of the camera. And also one thing that I still have, that I was finding, was this. This is called a Polaroid pack. There's actually still some Polaroid film here. The way we used this was to check the exposure. This was our LCD actually. We took an image, checked out the Polaroid, showed it to the client. The client said yes, and then we changed the back and put some film in there and took the same image with some film. And that was very good for two reasons. The first reason was that this way the client had approved our image. And the second thing was that we can be sure that the exposure is correct, because then after the shoot we took the films to the lab, and then we found out if we had made everything okay or did we screw up. So it was a different thing, but there are for you many of you who have shot film in the past days, so that's nothing new to you. But there might be some who had started with the digital, and the world was a bit different back then. So I started with the Mamiya RB67, and then I had the EOS10, and then I had the Pentax camera. So I had three different systems. The most camera that I did use was the Canon EOS10 and the Mamiya. The Pentax cameras was more or less like backup cameras, and when I shot something on my free time, I mostly used those Pentax cameras. All the way up till I started doing digital photography. And now I actually do have my first digital camera that I had. That was Canon D60. It's quite huge, as you can see. And right next to is my second camera, EOS1 D Mark II. And the D60 was a APS-C sensor camera, and the 1D was a APS-H camera. So it was a bit bigger than APS-C, but a bit smaller than full frame. And I think it was a quite good compromise. And the reason Canon had that was price, because at the time when that camera was launched, the price of a sensor was actually a big part of the camera's price was the price of the sensor, because the sensors were really expensive at that time, and that making an APS-H sensor, they could make the camera a bit more affordable, because I did not have money for a full frame camera at the time. But then a few years later came the 5D Mark II, and I think it was 2008 when I got it. And that was a game changer for me, because it had full HD video, very good quality. Okay, now when you look at it, it wasn't that good, but at the time it was something, it was a big revolution in making videos and making film. And that was when I started doing and experimenting and learning video. So that camera is something special. Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore because I traded it when I switched to Olympus in 2014. I also had the 5D Mark III, which was an even better camera because the 5D Mark II didn't have very good autofocus. The autofocus with the 5D Mark III was a lot better. And as a backup camera, I had a Canon 7D, which I also sold with all the lenses that I had. I had quite amount of different Canon lenses, which I of course traded in when I got the Olympus gear. But before we get into the Olympus gear, let's look what other cameras that I have used for my leisure photography I have in the cabinet, and also about the vintage cameras. And this is the oldest camera that I have here in my collection of cameras. This is Olympus Pen F, and that's something that I've never used. I just got it for fun because I just wanted to have one. It's a legendary camera and it's really beautiful. Of course, the what do you call, the exposure meter that is there is maybe not that beautiful. But anyways, it's a nice camera. Then right next to it is the Olympus M1, which is the first SLR, regular looking SLR. And if you want to learn more about Olympus vintage cameras, you might want to watch this video. It's a video about Olympus 100 years and 100 facts about Olympus cameras. And then there is one fun camera there that I got brand new. I really never used it. It's the Olympus E-P1. That's the first mirrorless camera from Olympus. And it's a fine camera. And what else do I have there? You can see the Canon cameras behind that we already saw. Then back there are a few the older Olympus cameras, the E-M5. And then there is the E-M5 Mark II. And then I'll take the E-M1 away, and then you can see the Olympus Ferrari camera. And behind the Olympus Ferrari there are two 360 cameras. And what else do I have? Yeah, then there's one interesting camera down there that I actually also got. Is a Fuji X10, which I used for street photography for some time. But there was one little problem with the camera. It was alright. The image quality, actually, I was watching some images that I took with it. The image quality was really nice, but the problem was with the viewfinder. It's kind of like a rangefinder type, but you had never, or you did not have any clue where the focusing was. But let's see, do we have something else here? Not really. Let's look what's next shelf here. And it's a bit darker. Let's open up the aperture a bit. There are a bunch of lenses. There's also a, let's take the Fuji away so we don't see. There is one Leica camera too, but that's not actually mine. That's my wife's grandfather's old camera, which I just happen to have here. And then what I have is a lot of different vintage lenses and adapters over here. And there's another Cosina CT1 back there. And then there is a third shelf, which is, let's go further down. And what we have here is a couple of Pentax cameras. There's the LX-1, and then you have FZ-20. And also a couple of lenses back there. There is actually a, I think it's a Tamron 100 to 400 millimeter zoom. But it's not a very good lens, but it's a fun lens to have. Never really used it with Olympus cameras. And then there is, here is an interesting thing. This is actually the motor from my Super A, but let's take that away. These are interesting. Those are filters that I used for shooting when I was shooting in tungsten, not tungsten light, but the fluorescent lights. And I had daylight film in the film back. Then I needed to use those too, because it was green. And without those filters, the images would have been green. But with the filters, they could be neutral colors. And then there is one Panasonic GH4, which I used for my video work before E-M1 Mark II came. And then there is the Olympus bellows that I got for just for fun. My first Olympus camera was E-M1, the original E-M1. And I bought 2 of those. And I've used them since I got the E-M1 Mark II, which I'm still using. I got 2 E-M1 Mark IIs, and that is my workhorse today. I do not have the E-M1 Mark III yet, at least. I might get it later, but because of the coronavirus, there's not too many photo gigs in my calendar, so that might be, you know, way in the future when I have money to get the E-M1 Mark III. And for my laser photography, I use the EM5 Mark III quite a lot. This is my favorite camera for travel and for laser photography. I just kind of like it. The look and feel is really nice. I really do like that camera. And then I also have some other Olympus OMD cameras like the OMD EM10 Mark II and Mark III for a purpose that I can make some videos about those cameras, which actually reminds me that I should do more videos about those cameras, because there's certainly a demand for those too. Those are really great cameras, even though there's been some newer cameras from Olympus, but still, those are really good cameras. But hey, I hope you enjoyed the video and stay safe, and thanks for watching, and bye for now.